This is That's So Second Millennium, where we explore issues at the interface between science, philosophy, and Catholic theology. I'm your host, Paul Giesting, and your co-host is Bill Schmidt.
Welcome back to That's So Second Millennium. Today on the podcast, we're very fortunate to have Chantal and Matthew Green of Fifth Place. They work in the mental and emotional health space. We're very interested to talk to them today, and so we'll let them introduce themselves.
Hi there, my name is Matthew.
And I'm Chantal.
Yes, and as Paul said, we work in an organization called Fifth Place. And at Fifth Place, our mission is to make the world a better place by enabling the how.
Yes, how to be less stressed.
How to make better choices under pressure.
How to be less anxious.
How to not feel guilty when I choose me.
Yes, and how to be more calm and peaceful.
Especially when you're doing a podcast.
Yes, and I find it interesting, of course, as an American listening to your South African accent, I can either say enabling the how or enabling the heart. It would sound almost the same, and in some ways that's almost a good thing. So why I have been curious, and I still don't actually know the answer, so I'm going to be finding it out on air here. What does the name Fifth Place mean?
Well, so the term evolves out of a book, and I'm going to ask Chantal to remind me of the author of the book.
Ray Oldenburg.
Because I always get it wrong. I like to call him Ray Oldenberry, but it's Ray Oldenburg. He wrote a book called The Great Good Place, and it was written in the early 1980s, and he was really doing an observation of how society was structured. And he described first place as home, second place as the place of work, third place being the place where people would connect for community, things like parks, libraries, coffee shops, and what have you. And so when we were looking and starting out, we observed that there was already a fourth place, the place of social media, where communities kind of coalesce or whatever online. And so for us, Fifth Place is the place of connectedness, community, possibility, well-being, and equality. And we aspire to build a fifth place in each of us as well.
Interesting. Yeah, has the Oldenburg concept of places been taken up by a lot of other people, or is this really something that you're revisiting and saying this needed to be paid more attention to?
Yeah, so it wasn't so much that it needed to be paid more attention to. It was really about coming back to ourselves and really and talking to both looking at building community, because that's really Ray Oldenburg was talking. He was bemoaning the fact that community had been destroyed in the American space because of suburban life. So people had left the cities, they'd left the towns, and they'd gone to live in suburbs, where now you drove to places, you didn't come together and meet your friends and meet your community members at coffee shops or at recreation centers. And he was really just saying that being able to do that was it was a lost opportunity in the American culture. And so for us, looking again at community and how important community was, but also connectedness. But connectedness starts with yourself. So when we want to be connected to each other, and community and connectedness is so important for us as human beings, we do need to start with ourselves and be connected with ourselves first, and then look to how it connects us to community, the environment, and the world as a whole.
Mm-hmm. That's fascinating. That resonates. Something that I read just this past week, that identity precedes intimacy was the claim that the author was making, that we need, and if we think of identity as being an intimacy with ourselves, that has to precede. That's the foundation for what we bring to other people.
Yes.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, it's funny how things just build off of each other. So you, in fifth place, you talk a lot about emotional fitness. Could you explain that concept a little bit?
Yes, so emotional fitness is it's the emotional equivalent of building physical fitness, but it's a holistic process. So we just believe that our emotions really sit at the foundation of everything that we do. And typically, emotions have been overlooked. They've been seen as messy, unnecessary. Actually, we need to, if we can't control them, then we must just sort of avoid them if we can, because they get in the way of us being rational, objective, and logical human beings. And we must, aspire to that. That's the myth. That's the story or the narrative of typically Western culture. And for us, what is really missing is the element of heart or emotion, and being able to reconnect to that, and then develop our emotions and develop a way of regulating and working with our emotions in a resourceful and appropriate way that is going to support us in our work, in our relationships, in being able to strive for opportunities and to build possibility. So emotional fitness really sits at the heart of it, and we call it emotional fitness. Other people call it emotion regulation or emotion resilience. It sits at the heart of what we say is our framework, which is built on the 5 pillars. And the 5 pillars are thinking, nourishing, moving, relating, and feeling. And so it's really a holistic approach to living in the world.
So you have a podcast of your own, and remind us of what the name of that is.
The podcast,
and I believe you're starting to.
Yes, the podcast is called Emotions Matter, Really.
Really, yes, with an exclamation point at the end. So if you're looking for that, gentle listener, that's where you'll find it. And you're starting a series on the 5 pillars, as I recall, because I have definitely subscribed to it and been listening to some of it with, I think, great profit to myself. So I'm really grateful for that. Yeah. I don't know how it strikes other people. This is something I've pondered for a long time, is that what is this business about, my reason, my logic, my intellect is a great tool. It gets me from one place to another, but it doesn't tell me where I want to go. So in this paradigm that you're talking about, do we have and certainly, you could make the argument that, as spirituality declines, and is replaced by secular culture and just, distractions, consumerist culture, and you can attack it from many different directions. That in some sense would provide a transcendental, some goal outside of the intellect itself to go toward. What about, as you see it, as you guys see it, what are we trying to head toward as human beings? And what does emotional fitness help us do?
So I'm not sure what we are endeavoring to head towards at the moment. If you had to look in broad swathes across the world, certainly in our experience of doing this work, what we've seen is that there is a great intelligence that resides within the body. And because our emotions are experienced in the body, we would do well to build our emotional fitness and sort of become more or better friends, if you like, with our emotions. I like to use the metaphor of the intellect and who I believe I am, my sense of identity as the captain, and my body as a vessel, a sailing vessel. And there's this symbiotic relationship between the two, because if I look after my sailing ship, it's going to take me where I need to go. If I attend to the sails, etc., then it will keep me in good stead. But further to that, the vessel has its own intelligence, and what we've seen countless times through therapy and through coaching is that if we want a guide, as to a direction, then cultivating an ability to hear the messages from the body will also do us well, because our brain and our intellect typically operates from past experience. And if we want to get a new experience or a different experience, the place that we can find that is through the intelligence of the body. And in conjunction with that, the relationship that we build with the body by cultivating a better ability to feel.
So it's not so much it's a master-vessel relationship as like, a captain-crew almost relationship.
Yes.
All of them have their own specialties and intelligences, and they bring all this to the table.
Because, as an example, sometimes in a therapeutic context or a counseling or coaching context, you ask somebody a question and they think they know the answer, and they'll have an impulse or a thought that seems very left field or very random, and often that is the doorway to the particular rabbit hole that leads to light bulb moments, relief, a different perspective, rather than filtering it through the intellect. So what we've seen is that thinking and cognition has been really elevated to a place where it perhaps shouldn't be, because it's a little bit out of balance. And what we believe is the world thinks too much. And given the sheer volume of thinking that takes place in the world to tackle our problems, whether they're personal or larger, is that we shouldn't have as many problems as we do if thinking was the panacea or the silver bullet.
Yes.
And so what we came to ask our question is, well, what's the missing piece? And the missing piece really is building emotional fitness, learning to feel more and become more connected with your body.
And when you connect with yourself, you also, once you're comfortable and connected with yourself, you're then far more open to connect with others, especially others that are different to one. So those feelings of fear and anxiety and stress are released, and so that it's much easier to connect with others. And at the end of the day, relationship is so important in our world and in our lives to make us healthy human beings. And obviously the first relationship is with ourselves, but then to build good relationships socially, whether it's with family or friends or colleagues, it just allows us to do that far better.
Yeah. Perhaps the point is, perhaps peace itself is the point, living at peace with oneself and with one's neighbors. Perhaps that's a good objective in itself. So so you have a practice associated with emotional fitness that I have, experimented with myself and found very interesting. And so it's got, I was going to back up and ask you what led you into the area of emotional fitness to start with, because I know you have a story related to that.
Well, it goes back a little bit, and it goes back to 2017 when we were working here in South Africa in the under-resourced school space. Just to contextualize a little bit what under-resourced means, it's effectively poverty, violence, little to no income, less than $2 a day is the kind of environment. And what we were witness to was the huge amount of trauma that exists in this space and the impact that trauma has on learning. And when you're in a traumatic space, as you probably know, you're in fight, flight, or freeze, and anything that's non-essential to survival effectively is shut down. So if you really want to fix learning or enable learning in that kind of space, then the place to begin is really to help the learners regulate the way they feel. And so we set out to solve this problem, looking back quite naively, I must say, because we wanted to develop something that would work with children as well as adults, because children process emotion differently to adults, as well as create something that works in groups, because children show up in groups, classes of children. And further to that as well, a lot of our problems that we experience as adults arise from childhood. So why not really go and provide something that children can utilize, without having to live a lifetime of carrying all of this stuff. And then the sort of other aspect was really to look at the context, because South Africa is a traumatized continent and environment. We have the burden of apartheid here. We have slavery, colonialism, things like that. And so we really went on a journey of research and discovery, and came out the other end 10 months later with this particular practice and process. It's a model of emotion regulation called Shape of Emotion.
So that practice has some major components like visual. I mean, so the shape of emotion, you have to visualize the shape of the emotion, right? Where did that? How did your inspiration for including that component? How did that work?
So the process has 4 steps, and the first step is you need to feel that emotion. You need to feel whatever it is that you wish to release, or because this is a full model of emotion regulation. You can also visualize that which you want more of. So it's not just for difficult emotions; it's also for supportive ones. But you need to be able to feel them. Then notice where they arise in your body. So find where they arise in your body, and then observe what they look like. So the observation process is really a mindfulness-based process. It's a process where you go inwards to that place where the emotion has arisen, and our emotions arise all over. So it's in, on, or around our body. Going to that place, going inwards, and really just observing. So most people talk about visualization. We talk about observation, just allowing to show up what shows up. So not taking too much time thinking about what it should be that should be arising, just allowing it to arise. And we guide people through the process, because this is often quite new and different, and gosh, what am I supposed to be doing here? But it's just going inside and just seeing what it is that shows up. And a lot of the time in the beginning when we did this and we said shape, people said, "Oh, must I look for a triangle or a square?" And we're like, no. Right. We mean shape like form or object, or it can really be absolutely anything. It can even be something that's not really real, but it's just what shows up. And then using that shape, what we call the shape or form, and focusing on that, and then using touch points, which we have developed out of traditional Chinese medicine, because they are acupressure points. Matthew originally did something called EFT, or emotional freedom techniques, which uses some of these, but not exactly the same. We were very particular in choosing the points that we did, because they needed to be accessible. They also needed to cover the entire body system. And so you use the touch points while you see where the shape is and what it looks like, and then you're guided through the process to release and let go, or open embrace. We call the when you make it bigger, open and embrace. And that, what it does when you do the process, is that the shape changes, or it gets smaller, or it fades, or it moves somewhere, moves in your body. Everybody's different. It does different things. And the idea is that if you do the full process, that you do it until the actual shape has disappeared completely. And when you do the dial down, what we call the dial down or the down regulate, and if the shape disappears completely, then you will find that the actual feeling is also gone. So it's like it's gone. We, in the emotional fitness class, what we do is we do 3 wings, what we call wings, because we found in a group setting, we obviously can't check with each person how far they are. And so we found that 3 wings does bring relief, if not complete release of the emotion as well. So that's why we do 3 for what we call the dial down or the down regulate, and then we do 2 for the up regulate, because for some reason upregulation goes much quicker and it happens far faster, and so you don't need to do as many wings as you do for the down regulate. And so really that was the process. And it was almost, it sort of just happened. I mean, obviously underpinning, a lot of things underpin the process. So the touch points underpin the process. The words we use are very specific. They have an NLP component to them, because we don't say, how do you feel? We say, what do you feel? We talk about what it is and where it is. We use specific languaging, because it will allow you to do things that other ways of speaking will not. We use, in groups, we use what is called call and response. So in groups, when we say release and let go, people will respond with release and let go. So we use a call and response process as well.
Sure.
And obviously breathing. We use the breathing process too. And all of these elements have a scientific, research-backed underpinning. And in our process and in our work that we've done as well, obviously we have like piles and piles of evidence that the process works. And it works. It works. The only time it won't work is if you're completely concerned about whether you're doing it right or not, or stuck in your head. So we specifically say to people, feel that emotion. You don't need to name it. You can, obviously, there's nothing wrong with it, but sometimes when we worry about what it's called, we go back into our heads again, and we want people to come into their bodies and feel that. So it doesn't matter what it is, sort of feel it. And so we really about the feeling of and the experience, rather than the naming and being too caught up with what I'm doing and am I doing it right. So sometimes people who are stuck in their heads, they won't get it. It won't work. And then obviously people who are very, very traumatized and disassociated. So if they don't feel, then we have to work with them very, very slowly, or they need to work with their therapist very carefully in terms of just being able to reconnect to their bodies. And we do that very slowly in terms of a much longer process where they start actually being comfortable with just simply feeling sensation.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, my own experience with it, like when I've come to the process, it's nearly always been the emotion or the feeling that I want to downregulate is this. I mean, it's really physically a feeling of tension across my abdominal wall. Like that's pretty much always it. And it's been fascinating to go through the visualization or the perception. And fortunately, I would have been in danger of being one of those people who was too much in their head at the outset of the process. But fortunately, I've been on my own journey that's helped me a little bit, probably prepared me for this, to let myself see, okay, and not, I mean, I overthink it some. Maybe I don't overthink it as much as I would have otherwise. But it's been remarkable. There's, not every, this doesn't describe every experience that I've had with it, but there's certainly been this, like at the beginning, it can be very concrete. Like there's this, once I, get into the mode of like, okay, I'm attempting to visualize this, there can be something, and it's usually, located there near my abdomen. And it can be very sharply visible, sharply defined, perhaps sharply textured, perhaps not, bright, visible, like bright, but, intensely colored, I should say. And then, it does fade over the course of doing 3 of these wings. Usually sort of moves somewhere, leans out of the body or sometimes leans in. The early times it seemed to lean more in. It's been a fascinating experience. It's certainly something that I think a lot of, obviously, I find it easy to believe that a lot of people are finding value in it. So, and you talked about, and I was fascinated. I had a friend in graduate school who was, very intrigued by Chinese medicine as well. So I wondered if there was a connection there with the touch points and what you chose to use. If we can get a little nerdy for a moment, what systems are we activating from that perspective when we, crossing the body with those touch points?
So so what we did is we made sure that every one of the touch points all together will activate and will attend to every part of our body. So if you go to the acupressure points, you will see when, depending on where you're touching, it will activate or go to a specific part of the body or meridian, and those meridians then talk to different parts of the body, skeletal system, the organs, etc., etc. And so we made sure that whatever we chose, all together, if you do them all together, you will have touched every single part of your body.
The major environment.
Yes.
And it was done in that way to make it accessible, bearing in mind the original inspiration for children, so that it was kind of simple to learn but effective to get a result. So it wasn't too difficult to sort of explain, because there's 14 touch points that we effectively ended up choosing and working with. And so it really is just that part of that process in the simplification, or rather providing a simple methodology that you can use. Because if the child is very young or someone is in a very traumatized state, just using the touch points, because one of the things that happens when you use the touch points is it stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system. So just using the touch points is a valuable tool to regulate and kind of get your parasympathetic nervous system to come online and kick in and help by sending your brain the signals to release the chemicals and hormones that are responsible for slowing things down, for regulating heart rate and so on.
Yeah, that sort of gives a little extra, when you present the practice, there's the statement when you start a new wing, and if it's faded, just continue to do this in support of yourself. Like that makes a certain amount of sense that yeah. I mean, we live so much in our head, we live so much on screens, just having that physical experience, I guess, seems like a valuable thing to do on a regular basis.
Yes, and also when we do also remind people that we release in different ways. So you may find yourself yawning or sighing. You may even cough or sneeze. There are different ways or shudder. And we've sort of, as we've gone along, we've needed to remind people that this is very normal, because sometimes what would happen is that people, because they've been socialized to say that when you're yawning, you're bored or tired, they would try and stifle their yawn if we did it in a group. And we'd have to say it's absolutely fine. In fact, it's important that you do yawn, because the yawning is allowing for that release. And crying, sometimes people would and they'd be like, I don't know why I'm crying. And it's like, it's absolutely fine. It's just your body needing to release. And this is one way. Yeah. It's not necessarily that you're sobbing, but you find that your body's starting to release. And this is just one way of doing it. So it is important to remind people. And this is why we talk about coming back to your body, because we just don't know that. We don't know that when we're yawning, and it's not necessarily because we're tired. When we sigh, it's part of that also bringing the parasympathetic nervous system online. All of these things are just helping to release the energy, release those chemicals that typically we hold on to, and it's in the holding on to that we actually end up getting ill.
Oh, yes. Yeah, hanging on to that anxiety, and I've heard it sometimes called the internal drugstore. We're so used to having that much, say, cortisol in our system that simply we don't feel normal without it, even though it's very destructive.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and of course, not being that familiar with South Africa, it's kind of I'm very curious. What do people's, both cultural and specifically religious attitudes, how does that seem to make a difference in the practice, whether with children or with adults? have you seen an interaction there?
It's a really good question because we live in a multifaceted, multicultural world. And in South Africa, it's an interesting country from that perspective. We have 11 official languages, to give you some. And so that can give you some idea of the kind of melting pot, if you like, or mishmash of cultures. So it really gave us a lot of opportunity to experiment with people who don't speak English, who are not European, so culturally very different to us. And we found that it's very effective in supporting a multitude or a wide range of diverse people across the age spectrum, across the sort of cultural spectrum, and also in a way across the education spectrum. We find, again, this talks a little bit to the cognitive side, but people who are very, I want to say, heavily educated sometimes struggle to be in their bodies and to express. And a lot of the other cultures that here live in South Africa, movement and dance and song is a very integral part of their culture. So they take to the process a little bit more easily because they, in general, are more embodied by default.
And also, so the flip side of that, though, is that there's a high level of taboo and what's the other word? Stigma. So certainly in the Black cultures, things like depression, mental illness, that is like you don't even talk about it in some instances. Certainly in more city areas and more urbanized families, it's sort of a little bit more not even spoken about, but accepted. But certainly in some rural areas, it's not even accepted. And if you do have a mental illness, then sometimes they say that you've been, possessed by demons, or there's something else that's happening here. So from a taboo and a perspective and stigma perspective, what this also does, and it also helps in a space which is quite male orientated. You don't need to speak about how you're feeling, and you don't need to say why you're feeling the way that you are, which is a real advantage. So we can sit in a group of people, and a lot of the time, you'd come to a group like this, and most, and I have to say in a generalized way, but certainly in South Africa, you'd have a lot of men going, I don't want to go because I really don't want to talk about it. I'm not interested. I don't want to talk. And they don't, and nobody needs to talk. You don't need to say what you're feeling. Right. You don't need to say why you're feeling it. And you can get relief. And I think that, and it's not to say this is a be all and end all. This isn't to replace talk therapy. This isn't to replace other means of supporting yourself emotionally. But certainly it does allow one to get relief. And this is the big thing. None of us have been taught how to manage and regulate our emotions. Very few of us have.
Before we start.
Yeah, certainly. Yes, exactly. So none of us have been given those skills. They're just starting to bring into schools things about recognizing different emotions and using, facial expression, which in and of themselves is not actually sound, but at least there's some recognition. But it doesn't talk to how to manage and deal with it. So what this does is it does offer a way of being able to regulate or release and find relief for those difficult emotions, and also to find a way to make more a more supportive feeling, so that you actually enter your day, you enter wherever you're going, feeling more buoyed, more positive, feeling maybe calmer, have a more peaceful sense about you, and those two. So reducing the negative and making the positive more really do support improved resilience and improved what we call emotional fitness on an ongoing basis.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, another aspect of it that strikes me as you're talking here is that, what do addictions and compulsive behaviors and even to some degree obsessive thoughts do for one? They're an attempt in many cases to regulate emotions that someone doesn't have the tools to actually deal with in a constructive manner. And that seems like it could potentially be invaluable for people like that. Have you seen any sort of effects of that nature?
Well, again, I like the question a lot, and I think the context is because this month is Suicide Prevention Month, and we had Suicide Prevention Day last week, and the podcast we did was about my story, which is having survived 2 suicide attempts when I was younger. And in the recollection of that, by way of an example, is my inability to manage the way I felt and the feelings. I started out self-harming and then started with suicide ideation, and then it got to the point where I just needed to switch it off. And that was when I attempted suicide. And so it's very key. And so we know how useful and powerful it is to utilize something like shape of emotion, because we call it banning, burying, avoiding, and numbing. So those things that you described are all positive, even though the sort of the outer appearance of it is negative. They are a positive attempt to manage an emotional state that is unresourceful. So addictions and so on, they're kind of a solution that's gone awry.
Yes.
And so we have seen where, we've worked in psychiatric clinics with the work and to great effect. So it really is, I think, the ability to enable people to more resourcefully manage these emotional states is what is key, instead of trying to avoid them through whatever means, substance abuse or self-harm, or shopping, social media, excessive sport are all examples of that, which are not so desperate. Drug use, and we've seen that if people do engage, we've had clients that come with these particular challenges, that by learning to use shape of emotion to regulate the way they feel, they can then be more resourced and in a more in a better way, more generative place to make better choices and so on.
Yeah, that's very powerful. What? So you've been working on this, you said, since 2017, which of course in some ways seems like a very long time ago now, and in other ways, that's 5 years. It's not forever in human history. What do you see on the horizon for what you're trying to do and for this emotional fitness concept?
I think for us, Chantal can also offer her perspective, because sometimes we have differing perspectives. I believe that if more people understood and valued the importance that emotions play in our life, and then not necessarily our approach to emotional fitness, because as Chantal said earlier, that's a way, but got involved in activities where they learned to manage the way that they feel. Because, as I said earlier, we believe that feeling is the very much relegated and played down aspect of what it means to be a human being. And yet we've seen that the thing that unites us is our emotions. The thing that is common to us as human beings are our emotional states. And the research illustrates this as well. It goes back, we've seen research from late 80s, early 90s about the importance of emotions, the impact they have on physical health, relational health, mental well-being, and so on.
We do also feel, so we're working on a book. We do think that having something that gives a fuller picture of what we mean by emotional fitness just helps people sort of internalize it and understand it. So that's really important going forward. We're going to be focusing on that. We believe that we stand at a point in the world similar to where physical fitness was at a time when the only people who went to a gym were boxers. Nobody went to gyms. They didn't, physical fitness was something that you did by maybe playing a sport or going for a run, but there really wasn't a real understanding of why physical fitness was good for us per se. And we believe that's where we currently are in the emotional fitness space in the world. That people really, they have a sense, but it's not really, it's like, yes, it's nice, but for somebody else. Typically mental health and well-being has been relegated to illness, not to wellness.
Yeah.
And so there's very much, I think it's made it a little bit easier with the mindfulness sort of drive. People are getting an understanding of mindfulness and how that is useful to us. I also do think that coming out of the last 2 and a bit years of lockdowns and isolation and fears around viruses, etc., has also heightened the awareness of our feelings of discomfort, anxiety, stress, burnout, etc. But awareness doesn't necessarily lead to a change in behavior. So a large part of what we do and what we are doing is around educating. It's educating, it's spreading the word, it's introducing people to the process, it's giving them options. It's like, here's another option. But really not expecting a huge sort of standing ovation because people are still very much, we find early adopters. So it's the early adopters that are getting it, but still a large portion of people who are still sort of going, nah, don't think that it's important. It's fine. Yes, I am stressed, but so what? Everybody's stressed. Really not understanding the impact, the long-term impact.
As they reach for another cigarette.
Yes, as they reach for another cigarette.
Right.
So
cigarette, another Twinkie, whatever.
Exactly. So a large part of going forward, I mean, there's huge opportunity and possibility. But, if I think of John Kabat-Zinn, when he started doing mindfulness-based stress release, it was stress reduction. It was in the 70s, and now we're sitting here in the 2020s, and people are going, wow, this is amazing. We all should get into mindfulness. So, we're talking several decades down the line, and hopefully it's not going to take us that long to get people to really understand the importance of it. But truly, there's a huge opportunity, but also a large part is really just around educating, offering, speaking into the process, and then teaching,
normalizing it in a sense.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean that's the frustrating thing about being human is that you can count on other humans not to universally adopt whatever insight that you have. I mean, I'm just sitting here thinking, like, physical fitness has been there for a while. There's a great, I don't know how many people have actually read this, but, Benjamin Franklin is at least a person that, I think suspect even people in South Africa have heard of the American named Benjamin Franklin. And he has, when did I read this? It was something in high school. So, of course, the 1770s, let us say, he's talking about, he writes something called The Dialogue of Franklin with the Gout. And he has a dim awareness that, he probably wouldn't feel all these twinges and pain if he got actual exercise of some kind. So he's talking to the gout and saying, well, but I go for a ride in my carriage. And the gout's like, that's not exercise. I'm paraphrasing here, but, that doesn't count. Here, have this and this. And it's we don't do what's good for us. And then I think from another perspective of how many centuries and millennia have we known that prayer, silent prayer, meditation, these things are good for us, and how many adopters are there of that? Well, I mean some, and it comes and goes. But yeah. It's like, do what you can for the people who are willing to accept it, I guess.
Yes. That's very much our approach. We don't try to convince, and it's always, sometimes being human, we also get a bit agitated, but it's about an offer as much as possible. And those that resonate with it and engage with it, then, we work and share with those like here. So thank you.
Yeah, and that is beautiful that image of, I have been through my own, traumas and stressful experiences, and I wish that in the, mid-'80s when I was a kid and this had just happened, that anyone had any idea that I would have needed this kind of help. So I'm grateful that children today somewhere are getting some of the help that they need. That's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. Did you have any closing thoughts here? I think we've kind of reached a good point here. It's been a beautiful conversation. Any last thoughts here?
I just wanted to say, maybe if it's relevant, from a spiritual perspective, that it can deepen your connection, whatever you describe that connection as. So certainly for us, for me, utilizing it as part of a deepening meditative or prayer practice, and also to the extent that we, in our journey since 2017, managed to engage with and attract the interests of 2 Catholic nuns. And one was so taken with it that she decided to take, because we teach it, and so we have different levels of accreditation. She studied the first level and became qualified in the process as well. And she really was a delight, or is a delight, because she's also, I think she's by now an octogenarian. So yes. Somebody that I think, has lived quite a lot of life, and it was a really nice affirmation of the work and what it was able to do for her as well. And so I know that is an aspect of this particular podcast that is relevant. So I just wanted to share that.
Yeah. That's the whole thing, is that we're dealing with one reality, and there are not these like hard break points between the mental and the spiritual, or for that matter, either one and the physical. So is she in South Africa, this person you were discussing?
Yes.
Yeah.
The one who did the course is in South Africa, and the other one is in Zambia. Okay.
Yeah. Well, and I hope they have the chance to take this wisdom and pass it down. And that's the great human story when we're doing it right, is sharing the good that we've encountered with others. So well, this has been really great. I'm really grateful that we had the chance to have this conversation, and that you're doing the work that you're doing. So.
Well, thank you as well. I think it's important, in light of what you said, just about sharing the story, because you never know who's listening, because whenever they listen, it's in their reality, their present time. And so this is a nice way of extending the story into various present times for people in ways that we can't. So thank you very much for being open and engaging with us.
Well, I'm very grateful for this time, and hopefully we'll run into each other again. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Yes, back at you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of That's So Second Millennium. TSSM's audio producer is Morgan Burkhardt. Our theme music, Igneous Grok, was composed and performed by Vin Marquardt. For my co-host Bill Schmidt, I'm Paul Giesting. Until next time.